everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to disable local policy merge on Windows Firewall. Local policy merge is a setting that disables locally configured settings on devices. So if you disable local policy merge on something, because it's not related only to Windows Firewall, but it's related also to other parts of Windows or other components or products, services. When you disable local policy merge, it means that the locally configured settings will be ignored and only the settings that are configured and applied centrally will be taken into account. Disabling local policy merge is a good recommendation in general, but you need to be aware of the consequences. For example, for Microsoft Defender, you can also disable local policy merge for some parts of Microsoft Defender, and it's usually a good idea to disable it, because then it means that even if a local administrator on the device changes some settings, the changes will not be applied, will not be taken into account, and only the settings that are configured centrally, for example via Microsoft Intune, will be actually applied. The same is true also for Windows Firewall. You can also disable local policy merge for Windows Firewall. But here it's even more important to be aware of the consequences. Because when you disable local policy merge on Windows Firewall, it means that the default built-in rules that are part of the Windows operating system will be ignored. And there is a lot of built-in default rules that are there that allow the standard system components, the services, to actually work. Let me give you an example. For example, IP version 6. IP version 6 usually depends on router advertisements. Because, for example, DNS would be configured via router advertisements. When you disable local policy merge on Windows Firewall and do not create any custom rules, this built-in rule that enables router advertisements will be also disabled, which means that IPv6 will likely not work. I have tested it, and when I disabled local policy merge without configuring any custom rules, IPv6 stopped working on my computer. I simply didn't get the right DNS configuration for my router, and after a few minutes I lost also the information about default gateway for IPv6. So IPv6 was simply not functioning on my device any longer when I disabled local policy merge for Windows Firewall. So that's very important. That's the reason why it's very important to test it carefully, to think about the consequences and create the necessary rules manually via Microsoft Intune. The same is true also, for instance, for ICMP echo requests. ICMP echo request is the standard ping that you probably use quite often to test the reachability of network devices. When you disable local policy merge, ping will also stop working, or your device will stop responding to ICMP echo requests, which means it will not be responding to ping, which means it will be unreachable. You will not be able to test whether or not the device is available on the network. So there are quite important consequences and you need to think about it. You need to review the built-in default Windows Firewall rules that are on your systems and recreate the rules manually via Microsoft Intune. On the other hand, it's a good idea to actually disable local policy merge for Windows Firewall for strictly regulated environments. It's probably not a good idea to configure it for less regulated environments, let's say for the standard small business companies that don't have so strict requirements and regulations. But on the other hand, it's a very good idea to configure it for more regulated environments, the corporate environments, because usually applications create their own firewall rules, and sometimes the rules are unnecessary. So it's a good idea to disable local policy merge for Windows Firewall for devices where you need to have Windows Firewall under your control. Let's have a look on how you can configure it via Microsoft Intune. So if you open the Microsoft Intune Admin Center and go to Endpoint Security, Firewall, you can create a new policy here. The policy platform will be Windows 10, Windows 11 and Windows Server. The profile will be Windows Firewall. You can name the profile however you want. So I will do disable Windows Firewall local policy merge, for example. And the important part is here, configuration settings. Firewall is the part that we want to expand. And when you want to disable local policy merge for Windows Firewall, you should disable it for all firewall types that you use. So if it's domain environment, then you need to disable it for the domain network firewall. If you want to disable it also for private networks or public networks, you need to configure the settings there as well. So in general, I would say configure it for all. In my opinion, the most important is at least the public network firewall, because that's the most sensitive one. That's any environment that's not under your control. But let me show you how to do it. So you first need to enable domain network firewall if you want to configure it for the domain network firewall. And then it expands out and you can see the settings allow local policy merge here. And that's the setting you need to disable. So you change the setting to false. You can do, or actually should do, the same also for private firewall. So enable settings and disable allow local policy merge. And the same for public network firewall. Allow local policy merge is disabled. Then you can define the scope tags or assignments. That's completely up to you, but like I said, test it carefully first before you actually enforce it. So don't go with like all devices. Test it on some very small subset of devices in your environment, and only when you have verified that it really works as expected, that you have configured all the rules manually that you need to have configured, then you can proceed and expand the scope of the policy. When you need to, or when you configure this, you should check the settings locally on some of the devices. So open the Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security Console. And if you go to inbound rules, you would see that there is a lot of default inbound rules. Like I said, even some applications create their own inbound rules, such as you can see Firefox here, Logi Options, Tail Scale, and you would find many more, Microsoft Teams, Center Feedback Center, and so on and so on. These are the rules that are already created on your system. And when you see the green tick on the left, it means that the firewall rule is actually also enabled. So these rules are applied. So there are the default system rules, but also the application rules, the rules that were created by applications. This will be visible here even when you have applied the policy that disables local policy merge. These rules will not disappear. It will still be here, even the green tick will be on the left of the rules. So when you want to validate that the local policy merge is actually disabled, you need to go to Monitoring, Firewall. When you open this and wait a few seconds, it actually loads up the rules that are actively applied on the device. So as you can see, because I haven't applied the policy on my computer, so you see the same list that we saw on the default rules. So all of the built-in rules are actually effectively applied on my device. When you disable local policy merge, this list will be empty unless you create your own custom rules via Microsoft Intune. So that's the important part of it, because as you can see, there are also the core networking components or rules for core networking, including, for instance, the aforementioned router advertisements or router solicitation. These will all be gone when you disable local policy merge for Windows Firewall. So you should be very careful and you should test it very carefully and create your own custom rules before you actually deploy it to your computers. That's all from my side for today. I hope you liked it. If you like my videos, my tutorials, please share it with your friends, your colleagues, your co-workers. And also don't forget to follow my weekly news from the world of IT and cybersecurity that I publish on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or also YouTube. It's a short podcast that you can simply listen to. It's available free of charge, no additional cost. And I hope you like my videos as well. And I hope I will see you next time on one of my upcoming tutorials.